All right, on to housing. It's been called the Montana Miracle, the bipartisan collaboration of the Governor's Housing Task Force to address the housing crisis in Montana. Progress has been made, but more needs to be done, as the governor shared with you this morning. And so that's why the task force was extended through 2025. So co-chairing the task force is Department of Environmental Quality and soon to be the director of the Department of Transportation, Chris Dorrington, and he's here to lead this discussion. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I have an amazing panel. We're going to gain a handful of perspectives here today. I'm Chris Dorrington. Thank you, Governor, for giving a great intro already on housing. I think when I was first appointed as the Housing Task Force Chair, people were like, why is the regulatory guy going to do that? And it's honestly because we were doing a really bad job. At the point in which we initiated Housing Task Force, we were 472 applications behind. By December of the same year, we were completely caught up. And we've sustained on-time performance for that regulatory approval of subdivisions ever since. Huge deal. So as Nancy said, I'm the director of the Department of Environmental Quality for another week, and then I'll be the director at Transportation, and I get to serve as the Housing Task Force Chair. I just wanted to allow my panel members to introduce themselves quickly, and then we'll have a dialogue about housing in Montana.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate being here. Be invited to the panel. I'm Brody Simpkins with Simpkins Howland Lumber here in Bozeman. I'm a third generation of that business. My grandfather started in West Yellowstone, 1946. And we're a very proud business. I'm vice president of it. I've worked with my dad every day, and really appreciate the chance to talk about housing and affordability around Montana, around Bozeman specifically. It's an issue that has significantly impacted us over the last 3 to 4 years, and I'm happy to share my thoughts today.
Thank you. Go ahead, Brian.
I'm Brian Beaucamp. I own Beaucamp Development Group and Beaucamp Construction in Western Montana. And if you ever asked me, I'd be sitting on a panel with Mr. Dorrington from DEQ, and I laughed at you. But I want to personally thank you. You've done an incredible job since you took that over. It's been made our life a lot easier, so appreciate that.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dan Brooks with the Billings Chamber of Commerce. We've had the opportunity to work on some of this housing legislation throughout the last session and continue to push for some more of those policies locally to help out our local member businesses. The other hat that I get to wear, I'm also the chair of our Billings City Zoning Commission, so hopefully I'll have some wisdom, perhaps, to share in that regard, too. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Brody, I'm going to have you go first. Tell us a little bit about your business. Tell us a little bit about the growth in the area, where you see growth going from here.
No.
Thank you. The growth over the last since 2019, we were doing 30% increases in sales year on year. Some of that was inflated lumber prices, but a lot of that was just demand. And at the same time, I feel what I've seen is Montana's such a construction-heavy industry with agriculture and tourism, I believe. And when you have this increase in construction demand, the whole industry gets affected, where we'll have employees leaving for job sites we're delivering to. And so what we were doing was seeing a 30% increase in revenue year on year, and seeing a decrease of about 10% of our workforce in our own business year on year. So what it did was, of course, it drove up wages, and getting a very competitive labor force out there, where our truckers, our loaders, they're making more than people with PhDs in town. And I think that's something that is kind of eye-catching to me, to just show where we are at as a state. We should be very proud of that, but at the same time, it is going to cause the issues like we're speaking about today.
Very good. Thank you on that. Beyond the labor front, tell me a little bit about some of your frustrations that you feel.
It's hard to complain because I got into the business in 2009. And I think at the time I didn't think that was great, when we're sending people home and unfortunately laying some people off. But it was a great time to come in as a perspective to now, where these are challenges. These are issues of the competitive wages. We've got older folks in the company who have had their homes paid off for years. Those are the people who have been immune to the problem of the affordability in Bozeman particularly. And now we've got younger people coming in, changing of the guard, and having a harder time getting to be an equity owner in a home. And so there's a loss of talent there. That's a frustration. We've lost a lot of talent, I think, just from not being able to recruit as a result of expense. But we have come up with solutions. We have helped subsidize housing. We've had to manage that benefit of employment for folks. That's a tough benefit to manage, because you've got a housing benefit that is not really attached to a signed agreement. So that's an issue, but certainly an issue of frustration is this rising cost.
Very good. Thank you, Brody. Appreciate that. Brian, tell us a little bit about Bow Camp development. And I know you're in Missoula. Tell us a little bit about the climate that you develop in.
It's Missoula. I'm fortunate enough to work in some other areas, but that one is definitely challenging. You guys want a case study or something? I'll tell you.
In a moment, I will definitely allow
But
that. Yeah.
Missoula's tough. Missoula's tough. You have a lot of people that, Governor, what was the term? Not in my backyard.
Yeah, YIMBY.
Yeah.
versus
so that's
NIMBY.
that's very common in anywhere we go in our public comment meetings and things of that nature. So it makes being a developer so much fun.
Sure. Dan, the Billings Chamber is obviously an important voice in the greater Billings economy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and some of the landscape that you see on a daily?
Yeah, definitely. So it'll come as a shock to nobody that what we hear often from our businesses is the need for housing, right? They want to recruit new talent to come in, grow their business, but we just don't have the supply. And even though we don't face necessarily the challenges that, say, a Bozeman or Missoula faces with that median cost being so high, ours is about $396, I think it was last month, we still don't have the supply to accommodate that. So we're certainly hearing it from our businesses. We recently polled our membership for our annual Public Policy Priorities Survey and asked them to rank what's most important to your business, what should we be focusing on as the chamber. We saw, as we often do, public safety took the #1 spot, but coming in closely at #2 was housing supply. So we've got our marching orders from our businesses to work on the housing supply issue. I've also had some recent conversations with some in our builders and development community. The city recently put out a new kind of agenda for application and processing permit fees. And I had sent it out and asked our home builders and others, what do you think about this increase in fees? And I don't want to say that they said it's not a big deal, but relative to time that it takes to get through the permitting and the rezoning processes, these are small things. So they would really like to see some more focus on that streamlining effort. And I think we'll see that with, say, Senate Bill 382 and some of the changes that were made there. And then the last thing that I wanted to share was I had met with a number of our architects, engineers after the last legislative session, kind of going over a number of the bills that were passed, part of the Montana Miracle, and just wanted to throw it out there. What do you think the impact is going to be from these? And I think much like we can easily admit, it's pretty doggone soon to tell, but one of the threads that got pulled out of that was Senate Bill 245, which would allow for residential development, multifamily, mixed use on any commercial zone, but it also reduces that minimum parking standard to no more than one. And from our architect engineer community, they said this is going to be a big deal for adding more housing. So that's kind of what we're hearing in the Billings area. Won't surprise anybody that housing's a big issue for us in Billings.
Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate that. In July of 22, the governor created the Housing Task Force and that I chair. We have a lot of really powerful members on that, broad stakes, bipartisan, legislative attendance, business people, local officials. What that resulted in for the 23 session were a handful of recommendations that landed in legislation. I just wanted you each to take a minute from the recommendations so far. How have you seen that play out in your communities? And honestly, as the governor said, we haven't solved housing, right? So let's not. While it's the Montana miracle, because of the process we undertook, we still have a long ways to go. You guys choose the order. It's fine.
I'll
Go
just
ahead,
give
Brody.
my assessment as a lumber guy. I think what I see, to just make a metaphor, the governor's delivered the lumber package to a job site, and you've got your plywood and you've got your dimensional wood. It's a great start, but there's really a lot of work to do to cut that up and frame it up. You know, what I've seen in Bozeman is I think the city has decided to adopt everything very quickly, and that can be difficult. And I appreciate that the city of Bozeman has tried to adopt it quickly. I think other places like Missoula might have been. But it really creates a lightning rod issue then, and there's a lot of misunderstandings. And there are certain things that need to be improved with it as well. So I think it's a great start, and I think what the governor has delivered is a tremendous opportunity to get to work, and that the work is really starting now.
Very good. Thanks, Brody. Brian, I think you have something to say about this.
Well, yeah, previous to the task force and Governor Gianforte, thank you so much, because we were disenchanted in investing in as a developer. It was getting so tough, we were getting beat up. So I was going to give you guys an example of something previous to what he did with his task force, and now they know that the state's watching, right? The big dog's watching. So we like to look at it as there's like three tranches in our world as a developer. I think we can all agree God quit making Western Montana a long time ago, right? So if there's nothing super catastrophic, I don't see land prices drastically slipping. You guys could probably agree with some of that or not. That's okay, it's my opinion. But then there's the middle piece that we're going to give you an example on. And then there's the far end, and I think a lot of us in the business would get that. I probably didn't pay attention in 5th grade to economics real good, but it's a supply and demand thing's pretty healthy. Mm-hmm. And if we have a lot of something, why should I buy the lumber from this guy versus this guy? So there's a competitive nature, and I think that affects the pricing, especially in the housing. But it's the piece in the middle, in my world, as a developer and investor, that we get beat up and lied to, and it's tough. And so thank you again for all the hard work and the things you guys put in place. Amazing. So I'm going to tell you a little story. We like to call it Harry and the Tree Guy in my company. We didn't want to use the planner's real name, but it rhymed with Harry, so she's Harry now. And the Tree Guy. So my team came to me and they said, listen, we have to get the housing pricing in this bubble. This is where the people, in that time it was Missoula, where they can afford. And if you can do this, we promise you, we'll sell these homes before you permit them. So it was a big challenge. So we went to work on it, brought our civil teams in, brought our land use attorneys in. And there was an amazing program in the state that you could use a townhome exemption, right? And we became masters at it, and we actually hand-delivered it to Missoula's planners with an attorney and said, we're doing this. 5.5 months later, I put the first townhome in the air, okay? 52-unit development. That's you don't do that in a subdivision. At the same time, across town, I was almost 3 years coming out of a subdivision process in a similar unit count development. Those houses at the same square footages were over 30% average higher price, so about $70,000. Immediately, I said, go find me another townhome property, because people were standing in line, they can afford it. I was selling those homes for $218,000, okay, 4.5 years ago. The planner, Harry, said, you can do this, but I will not approve it. We will not approve it. And so we called the mayor and we had a meeting. And I said, you got to understand what's going on. We have the right, but trying to sue a public official is a big deal. And He, as a good mayor, he wanted to work a deal. What's good for both of us? So they agreed that they would change subdivision regulation, and they promised us they would have it done in 6 months. And my partners looked at me and they said, we should take that deal. And I said, Harry's always lied to me. So 4.5 years later, I'm building the first townhome in that development. Okay? I don't know about you guys, but 4.5 years ago, things were a lot cheaper. 4.5 years ago, the interest was a lot cheaper, right? Those townhomes today are selling for $500,000. That's about $1,500 difference in a payment, right? That's awful. So we looked at that. Part of it was the tree guy. They all have the parks department and the tree. I don't even know his name. I just call him the tree guy. But every county I'm in has one. And we literally were held up for 11 months. I could not submit a permit for an application for the subdivision until this guy signed off. And he kept telling me we need more trees, and I said, mister, I went through your rules. I can't put one by that gas line. I can't put one by this meter, by the storm drains, they have rules. I'm following your rules. And he kept saying, that's for you to figure out. That was the answer, okay? So I finally, like at month 6, I said, tree guy, I'll bring you a bingo dopper or something. I don't care. I'll put the trees wherever you want. I don't even put those in as a developer, right? You got to have water and somebody living there. And we finally got that through. But so that was part of that timeline. But think about that, what that cost. So if I could have started 4 years ago, I'd have had 150 single-family residential homes built. 150 families realized that dream in a little bit cheaper time, right? And then, unfortunately, today we don't have that because there's too much power with Harry and the tree guy. You know what I mean? Like, so with, again, that's the things that you guys get an inside view of what a developer gets to deal with, so you can understand why we're incredibly grateful for the things that you've done.
Thank you very much. Daniel, thoughts?
Yeah, as far as impacts go, again, a little early to tell, but I do want to talk a little bit about the potential of some of these bills. I think one of the most important ones, and I was not as keen on it to start, Senate Bill 382, which among other things would require municipalities of a certain size to inventory and project housing needs for the next 20 years and then zone accordingly to allow for that housing. We've obviously never done that. We don't know exactly what our housing needs are, so I think it's incredibly important. We're going to have a structural accountability for cities to allow the housing that they need. I think this is super important. As I've marinated on it, I think this is going to be one of the most impactful things that passed. Kind of on the seemingly lower side of the impact, but I think it's really important, is a bill or a couple bills like Senate Bills 323 and 528, the ADU, and then the other bill that would allow any lot that has a single-family home on it would also then allow a duplex on it. So looking at some numbers, in Billings, we have about 32,000 single-family homes in Billings. If just 0.1% of those families decided we want to put another unit on our lot, that's 32 homes, and assuming this is in a year, 32 homes a year. That's 32 more potential people to come and work in our businesses. It's nothing to sneeze at. And especially if you look at kind of a reference point, we often look at how much housing has been brought in using the LIHTC or the Low-Income Housing Tax Credits program. And for Billings, a number of months back, I went and looked at the numbers for us. Since we started getting the grants in 1991, we've put 800 plus new units in Billings using the LIHTC program. That's about 25, 26 a year. So simply having the ability for existing property owners to add more units to their land, they can outpace what we get from an important but often emphasized program using the LIHTC credits. And granted, there are some differences. Those are definitionally affordable housing. These would be probably market rate, but we can help to fill those gaps using these new programs and get some people into the development community that might not otherwise be. Last thing I'll say on this is it's not the benefits from the housing task force and the leadership of the governor and the leadership of the legislature is not necessarily in the number of housing units added, but also in the discussions that we get to have. Because of the leadership and the ideas coming out of the Housing Task Force, the Overton window of policy discussions that we've been able to have locally has completely shifted. We recently went through a full 3-year rezone change update to our zoning code. We moved the ball in a good direction. I don't want to dismiss what was changed for the good, but it was pretty minimal, pretty incremental. What happened with the legislature really moved the ball down the field. We get to have some pretty serious conversations about much more impactful new housing reforms because of the legitimacy provided by the Housing Task Force for those new ideas. No longer is it, they're doing that in Minneapolis, or they're doing that in Texas, or God forbid, that idea came out of California. No way. Now their ideas originating from a Montana-made Housing Task Force. And in fact, we actually had one of our local city council persons in January of this year put forth a new council initiative to look at 10 new built environment reforms. Many of the things, there's a lot of overlap. It's the minimum lot size or minimum lot width and onerous parking requirements. And my favorite, and maybe this should go on to the task force, but it's not really necessary to housing, but can we have local corner pubs in residential areas? Why do we have to drive everywhere to go do our drinking? So it's really...
Seems conflicting.
Yes. It has really changed the conversation that we've been able to have locally. So for that, I'm very thankful to the task force, the governor, and the legislature.
Thanks so much. I know we are between you and lunch, and I'll just take a question or two. Go ahead. I think you need a mic, and Carrie's coming quickly, just so everyone can hear you.
Thank you. Some of the bills that were discussed just now that have been passed, that's been helpful, as well as some of them that are proposed potentially for the next legislative session, I think do good things to help for housing. But one of the things that we're concerned about, some of those bills that have been passed conflict with the regulatory requirements by agencies like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which make it so that if we can get a piece of legislation passed to help someone get into a home, that's great. But if they're unable to finance it through traditional forms or traditional formats, we're stuck with portfolio products for financial institutions, which to some extent is a good thing because local banks want to do that, but it also limits the ability for people to get loans on these and then sell them on the secondary market, which is the business model of about 85% of the lenders out there. Has that been addressed? How is that being looked at?
One good question. I'm certainly not a financing expert, but for Montana, we have long planted really good solutions at the state level that the feds have looked at, and I don't say that lightly. I think making Fannie and Freddie change policy in order to modernize and become consistent with what I would say is a ubiquitous problem. This isn't a red-blue problem. This isn't an urban-rural problem. Housing is a problem across the United States. I speak at conferences, as does the governor, on a fairly routine basis, and I would say your financial institutions need to have a really strong voice with them and say, this isn't working. Within our framework, I don't have a recommendation for that. Anything from you guys? Other questions? Take care.
Yeah, I think Montana became either the first or one of the first states to allow 3D printing of buildings in the last year. I know that's moving forward kind of in Billings. I'm curious, thoughts on that innovative technique, where it's going from here, and how do we move it more rapidly along the process?
Thanks for your question. Do you mind if I just start really quick? It was a part of our phase 3. So the governor extended our housing task force. We're active through the session into July of 25. It is a topic that came up. Billings was referenced. Department of Labor that runs building codes was an active participant. So was a developer in Billings who would like to 3D print homes. It is enabled. It is allowed. And so local communities really need to work hard to make that work. And turn it over to Daniel about his Billings experience.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the question. A good shout out to Billings kind of leading the way on this front. But one of our local developers, a local architect, and our housing authority, Homefront, is working on a low-income housing project utilizing the benefits and the efficiencies of 3D printing to make it work and make it pencil so that they can sell that then to make it affordable housing for folks. In my discussions with the developer, it's one of those things. They got to kind of work out the kinks, figure out the supply chain issues. They use a proprietary blend that comes out of the extruder, and that's what forms the basis of the structure. The other thing that they need to do, and we'll hope to help in facilitating this, but work with the other trades, right? We've got to get our HVAC guys, our electricians, and others to figure out how to work around this new type of construction that is a little bit different, but certainly not insurmountable. And I think the efficiencies that we're going to have are going to lead to some big gains in the near future.
Thanks. One more.
So
Thank you.
everything you're talking about sounds real good for Billings, Bozeman, Missoula. Where I'm from Poplar, Montana, and I have a business there that I run, a tribal Department of Defense contractor. We don't have any problem with affordable housing because we have no housing. So how is the housing group addressing our small rural communities who are trying to grow businesses, but we don't have housing, we can't attract anybody to our community because we have nowhere to put them?
Sure. The first thing I'd say is, going back to my regulatory hat, the very thin, firm, and consistent line of regulatory certainty provides for the market to respond. And I'm going to ask Brian to touch on his experience with certainty and where that works. Where we are ready to provide clear, consistent answers, the market can provide a response. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to create an attraction to Poplar just by being really good at what we do. But it does change the lens. It certainly does change the lens in which investors will come to the table once they know they have a date certain and a consistent response from our side.
Yeah, I think it could be rural Montana, it could be Cut Bank, Poplar. Investors are looking for the certainty, right? They got money market type accounts doing single digits, and real estate still provides a better return for that. But it needs to come with the certainty. We can't have the idea of the month club from the planning department, right? And so having a level playing field across the board for a developer would allow us to go into more rural areas. And trust me, I probably would rather build over there than Missoula. So so I don't think it's a rural problem. We do have a little water thing going on now, but I'm sure we're gonna get past that, or it'll be very detrimental to development. But it is the certainty. It is the easier path, less regulation. That's where we're going to attract more investment and development, I think.
Thank you. Nancy, back to you, I would say, for the transition to lunch, and thanks for the time today, and thank you to the panel.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thanks, Chris, and we look forward to what you all produce as outcomes in 2025. We look forward to seeing where that goes. All right, we're ready to take a break for lunch. A huge thank you to the Montana Department of Commerce for putting on lunch. Lunch is right outside these doors, and then you'll come back in here to eat. And we are still on a tight schedule this afternoon, so please, if everybody can be back in their seats at 1:15, that would be fabulous. Thank you.